There is a dream that haunts the modern consciousness, a dream older than civilization itself, yet more urgent now than ever before. In this dream, you are climbing, always climbing. The mountain rises before you, its peak shrouded in clouds that promise something luminous, something that will finally complete you. Success, they call it, achievement, recognition, the fulfillment of your deepest potential. And so you climb. Your hands bleed, your lungs burn. But you climb because everyone around you is climbing, and to stop would mean to fall, to disappear into the nameless masses below who never dared to reach for the summit. You climb because you were told that at the top you would find yourself. That success would reveal who you truly are. But here is the question that will guide us through the next hours together. The question that Jung whispered to his patients in the quiet of his study. The question that echoes through every achievement, every victory, every moment of recognition. What if the summit is not where you find yourself, but where you lose yourself most completely? Tonight, we descend into the shadow side of success, not to condemn ambition or diminish achievement, but to illuminate what lives in the darkness that success casts. Because every light creates a shadow, every ascent demands a descent, and in the architecture of the human psyche, success is not simply the accumulation of external victories. It is a profound psychological event that rearranges the interior landscape of who we are. This is a journey into the parts of ourselves we abandon on the climb upward, the desires we deem unworthy, the vulnerabilities we bury, the authentic longings we sacrifice at the altar of achievement. This is an exploration of the paradox that lies at the heart of human striving, that in our quest to become something more, we often become something less. Carl Jung once wrote that the shadow is the person you would rather not be. But what if I told you that the shadow cast by success is not just the darkness we deny, but the light we've forgotten? What if the parts of yourself you left behind on your ascent are not weaknesses to be overcome, but essential fragments of your wholeness waiting to be reclaimed? Imagine a successful person. Perhaps you imagine someone in a corner office, or on a stage, or behind the wheel of an expensive car. Society has trained us to see success as a destination, a fixed point of arrival. But look closer. Look into their eyes during the moments when the cameras are off, when the applause fades, when they are alone with themselves in the 3 a.m. darkness. What do you see there? Often it is not peace, not fulfillment, not the radiant completion we were promised. Instead, there is something else, something hungry, something afraid, something that whispers in a voice they no longer recognize. Is this all there is? Is this who I really am? What did I give up to get here? This is the shadow speaking. This is the return of everything that was repressed, denied, and discarded in the pursuit of an external image of success. The ancient Greeks understood this paradox deeply. They gave us the myth of King Midas, whose golden touch, the ultimate symbol of success and wealth, became his curse. Everything he touched turned to gold, yes, but he could no longer feel the warmth of human skin, taste the sweetness of food, or embrace his own daughter. His success isolated him in a prison of cold metal, a metaphor so perfect it still resonates 25 centuries later. But we didn't listen. We never listened to these warnings, because we believe that we will be different, that our success will be pure, untainted by shadow, that we can climb to the summit without leaving parts of ourselves behind in the crevices. We cannot. The shadow side of success is not a moral failing. It is a psychological inevitability. It is what happens when we construct an identity around achievement and ignore the multiplicity of who we are. It is the price we pay for living in a culture that values productivity over presence, accomplishment over authenticity, the resume over the soul. And here is what makes this particularly dangerous in our current moment in human history. We live in the age of curated success. Social media has transformed achievement into a performative art, where success is not something you experience privately, but something you broadcast publicly. Instagram feeds filled with highlight reels, LinkedIn profiles that read like propaganda, a digital economy of attention where your worth is measured in likes, followers, and engagement metrics. Never before have humans been so pressured to appear successful while simultaneously feeling so empty. Never before has the gap between the external mask and the internal reality been so vast, and never before has the shadow of success grown so large, so dark, so demanding of acknowledgement. But tonight, we will not turn away from this shadow. We will descend into it. We will explore its origins, its manifestations, its psychological machinery. We will trace how success became our collective obsession and how that obsession distorts the architecture of human consciousness. We will examine the specific ways that success creates shadow, through repression, projection, and the fracturing of the self into acceptable and unacceptable parts. And most importantly, we will discover that the shadow side of success is not the enemy of achievement, but its necessary counterpart. That true success, the kind that nurtures rather than depletes, that integrates rather than fragments, that enriches the soul rather than selling it, requires us to befriend our shadow, to reclaim what we've lost, and to redefine success itself. This journey will take us through the corridors of depth psychology, into the laboratories of neuroscience, across the wisdom of ancient philosophy, and into the lived experiences of those who have reached the summit only to find it hollow. We will meet the parts of ourselves we abandoned, the playful child, the vulnerable heart, the creative spirit. And we will ask whether success that requires their sacrifice is success at all. The path ahead is not easy. Confronting the shadow never is. It will require us to question everything we've been taught about achievement, ambition, and self-worth. It will ask us to examine our own compromises, our own repressions, our own quiet desperation beneath the veneer of accomplishment. But if you've made it this far, if something in you recognized the truth in these opening words, then you are ready. You have already felt the shadow stirring. You have already sensed that something is missing, even, or especially, in your moments of greatest success. So let us begin. Let us descend together into the shadow side of success, not as an act of destruction, but as an act of reclamation. Not to abandon ambition, but to redeem it. Not to fail, but to succeed in a deeper, more authentic, more whole way. Because the summit is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning of the descent. And it is in the descent, into the shadow, into the truth, into the fullness of who we are, that we finally discover what success really means. The ancient alchemist had a phrase, as above, so below. They understood that every ascent must be balanced by a descent, that every light must acknowledge its shadow. They knew that transformation occurs not at the summit, but in the integration of heights and depths. Tonight, we become alchemists of our own consciousness. We go down to go forward. We embrace the shadow to find the light. We question success to discover what true achievement means. The journey begins now, not with a climb, but with a descent. Not with light, but with darkness. Not with answers, but with the most important question. Who did you have to stop being to become successful? And what would it mean to become whole again? Take a breath. Feel your heartbeat. This is the threshold. Beyond it lies territory rarely explored in our success-obsessed culture. The inner landscape where achievement and authenticity must finally reconcile, where the mask meets the face, where the shadow of success waits to teach us its most profound lessons. Let us descend. To understand the shadow side of success, we must first understand how success itself became the organizing principle of modern consciousness. We must trace its origins, its evolution, its infiltration into the deepest layers of human identity. Because success was not always the obsession it is today. There were epochs of human history where other values, honor, wisdom, spiritual attainment, artistic beauty, communal harmony, held equal or greater weight. But something shifted. Something fundamental changed in how humans conceived of their purpose and measured their worth. And that shift created the conditions for the shadow we now explore. Let us begin with a scene from Vienna, 1895. A young doctor named Sigmund Freud sits in his study, listening to his patients describe their symptoms: paralyses without physical cause, anxieties without clear origin, compulsions they cannot explain. And Freud makes a revolutionary observation. These symptoms are not random. They are messages from parts of the psyche that have been repressed, denied, pushed out of conscious awareness. He discovers the unconscious. He reveals that the mind is not a unified whole, but a layered territory, where conscious desires live alongside forbidden wishes, where the person we present to the world exists alongside the person we dare not be. This discovery would change everything, because if the unconscious exists, if there are parts of ourselves we hide even from ourselves, then every achievement, every success, every climb toward respectability might be simultaneously an escape from something within us we fear to face. But it was Freud's younger colleague, Carl Jung, who would give us the specific concept we need tonight: the shadow. In his work, Ion, Jung wrote, "The shadow is that hidden, repressed, for the most part inferior and guilt-laden personality whose ultimate ramifications reach back into the realm of our animal ancestors." Notice the language: hidden, repressed, inferior. These are not the qualities we associate with success. Success is visible, celebrated, superior. Success is everything the shadow is not. And that is precisely the problem. Jung understood that the psyche seeks wholeness, not perfection. That health is found in integration, not elimination. That we cannot simply cut away the parts of ourselves we deem unworthy and expect to remain psychologically intact. Yet this is exactly what success demands. It demands that we present only the acceptable parts, the productive parts, the parts that generate value and admiration. Everything else, the doubts, the fears, the unconventional desires, the vulnerabilities, the rage, the sadness, the need for rest, the longing for simplicity, goes into the shadow. And there it grows. There it festers. There it waits. But the shadow of success has older origins than modern psychology. To truly understand it, we must go further back, to the Enlightenment, when humanity began to believe that reason could conquer all, that progress was inevitable, that humans could master nature and themselves through will and intellect. René Descartes gave us "I think, therefore I am," a philosophy that equated existence with rational thought and inadvertently diminished everything else: emotion, intuition, the body, the irrational dimensions of being human. Success became increasingly associated with the mind's ability to control, calculate, and dominate. Then came the Industrial Revolution. Suddenly human worth could be measured in productivity. Time became money. Efficiency became virtue. The factory model of existence spread beyond the factory walls and into every domain of life. Success meant output. Achievement meant quantifiable results. And with capitalism's rise, particularly in its American manifestation, success took on an almost religious quality. The Protestant work ethic, as Max Weber analyzed it, transformed labor from a necessity into a moral imperative. To work hard was to prove your worth, not just to society, but to God. Success became evidence of divine favor. Failure became evidence of moral deficiency. This is crucial to understand. Success stopped being simply an outcome and became an identity. Your achievements defined your essence. Your productivity determined your value. You were what you accomplished. And if you were what you accomplished, then anything that didn't contribute to accomplishment became dangerous, became shadow material. Rest was reframed as laziness. Emotional vulnerability became weakness. Creativity that didn't generate profit became frivolous. Doubt became failure of confidence. The need for connection became neediness. Layer by layer, dimension by dimension, the full spectrum of human experience was divided into two categories: that which served success and that which threatened it. And everything in the second category was pushed down, repressed, relegated to the shadow. Now let us leap forward to the mid-20th century. America emerges from World War II as a global superpower. The American dream crystallizes into a specific formula: education plus hard work equals success equals happiness. The suburbs spread. Corporate culture dominates. A man in a grey flannel suit becomes the icon of achievement: respectable, stable, successful. But beneath this surface of prosperity, something is stirring. Psychologists begin noticing a phenomenon. People who have achieved everything they were supposed to achieve, the career, the house, the family, are profoundly unhappy. They suffer what Viktor Frankl would call existential vacuum, a sense of meaninglessness despite material success. The 1950s housewife, in her perfect home with her perfect children, experiences what Betty Friedan would name the problem that has no name. A deep dissatisfaction, a sense that something essential has been sacrificed for this vision of success. The corporate executive, climbing the ladder, begins to feel like what William H. White called the organization man, a cog in a machine, his individuality erased in service of institutional success. This is the shadow speaking. This is the return of the repressed. These are all the parts of the self that success demanded be sacrificed: authenticity, spontaneity, passion, meaning, connection, now knocking on the door of consciousness, demanding acknowledgement. The counterculture of the 1960s was, in many ways, a collective confrontation with this shadow. A generation that had been raised for success rejected the entire formula. They questioned achievement, abandoned conventional careers, explored consciousness rather than conquering it. But the pendulum would swing back. By the 1980s, success was back with a vengeance, bigger, bolder, more aggressive than ever. And then came the technology revolution. Suddenly, success became gamified. Startup culture emerged with its promise of exponential growth, overnight wealth, billion-dollar valuations. Tech entrepreneurs became the new cultural heroes, young, brilliant, visionary, often socially awkward, working 100-hour weeks to change the world. The language around success intensified. You didn't just start a company, you disrupted industries. You didn't just work hard, you hustled. Failure wasn't acceptable, you had to fail fast and iterate. Rest wasn't rest, it was unproductive time. The line between work and life dissolved entirely. Social media accelerated this transformation. Suddenly everyone's success, or carefully curated image of success, was on display constantly. The comparison game became relentless. FOMO, fear of missing out, became a diagnosable condition. Success was no longer just personal, it was performative, requiring constant documentation and validation. Studies began showing unprecedented levels of anxiety, depression, and burnout, particularly among high achievers. In Silicon Valley, where the success culture reached its most extreme expression, suicide rates climbed. Brilliant young people who had achieved everything by conventional metrics were jumping off bridges and overdosing on drugs. The shadow was erupting, and it could no longer be ignored. Neuroscience began revealing the mechanisms behind this. Research showed that the brain's reward systems, designed by evolution to motivate survival behaviors, were being hijacked by modern success metrics. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with achievement and reward, creates a cycle of craving and temporary satisfaction that drives compulsive behavior. Success, researchers discovered, is literally addictive. The high of achievement fades quickly, requiring ever greater accomplishments to generate the same feeling. Like any addiction, it leads to tolerance, dependency, and ultimately, emptiness. The summit keeps receding. The goalposts keep moving. Enough is never enough. And here is the most insidious part. Modern success culture specifically targets the shadow. It identifies the normal human needs for rest, connection, emotion, meaning, and reframes them as obstacles to be overcome. Productivity culture tells you that sleep is for the weak. Hustle culture glorifies exhaustion. Self-help books promise that you can eliminate negative emotions through positive thinking. But you cannot eliminate the shadow. You can only repress it. And the more you repress it, the more powerful it becomes. The more you deny your vulnerability, the more vulnerable you actually are. The more you pretend you don't need rest, the more your body will eventually force you to rest through illness or breakdown. The more you chase external validation, the emptier you feel inside. Jung saw this pattern in his patients throughout his career. He noticed that often people came to him not in their 20s or 30s, but in their 40s and 50s, precisely when they had achieved significant success. They came because despite their achievements, or perhaps because of them, they felt lost. They felt disconnected from themselves. They felt like they were living someone else's life. He called this the midlife crisis, but it's not really about age. It's about the moment when the shadow can no longer be contained, when all the repressed parts of the self demand acknowledgement, when the soul rebels against the life that success has created. And this brings us to the contemporary moment, to you, listening to these words right now. We live in what might be called the age of achievement anxiety, a time when success has never been more celebrated or more accessible in theory, yet never more elusive or exhausting in practice. The metrics of success have multiplied. It's not enough to have a good career. You must be passionate about your work. It's not enough to be in shape. You must have the perfect body. It's not enough to be intelligent. You must be exceptional. It's not enough to be doing well. You must be crushing it, killing it, living your best life. And all the while, the shadow grows. Because for every Instagram post showing success, there's an unposted moment of doubt. For every LinkedIn update celebrating an achievement, there's an unexpressed anxiety about what comes next. For every motivational quote about grinding and hustling, there's an exhausted human being who just wants to rest without guilt. This is where we stand, at the peak of success culture, and simultaneously at the moment of its potential transformation. Because the shadow cannot remain hidden forever. It returns. It always returns. And when it does, we have a choice. We can continue to deny it and suffer the consequences, or we can finally turn to face it. But to face the shadow of success requires understanding exactly what happens psychologically when we build our identity around achievement while repressing everything that doesn't serve that identity. It requires examining the specific mechanisms of shadow formation. It requires descending into the conflict, the crisis, the darkness that success creates. This is where our journey now leads. From the origins of success culture, we move into its psychological consequences. From the architecture of ambition, we descend into the abyss it creates. From understanding how we got here, we explore what it costs us to stay here. The foundations have been laid, the historical and psychological context established. Now we go deeper. Now we enter the territory where success reveals its true face, not in the bright lights of achievement, but in the dark corners of the psyche where everything we sacrifice to succeed waits in the shadows. The descent accelerates. Are you ready? There is a moment in every successful person's life that is never photographed, never celebrated, never discussed at motivational seminars. It is the moment when they reach the summit they've been climbing toward, the promotion, the milestone, the recognition, the achievement, and instead of the transcendent fulfillment they expected, they feel nothing, or worse than nothing. They feel empty. This is the moment when the shadow breaks through. This is when the repressed truth of success reveals itself. This is the conflict at the heart of achievement-oriented existence. We climb and climb, only to discover that the summit is not a destination, but a precipice, and below it lies everything we left behind. Let me tell you about James. This is not his real name, but his story is real. James was a vice president at a Fortune 500 company by age 35. Everything about his life looked perfect from the outside. Corner office, 6-figure salary, respected in his industry, married with 2 children, the American dream incarnate. But James had a secret. Every Sunday evening, he would experience crippling anxiety. His chest would tighten, his thoughts would race. Sometimes he would lock himself in the bathroom and sob, though he couldn't explain why. His wife noticed. His performance at work began to slip just slightly. He started drinking more, sleeping less, snapping at his children. James came to therapy believing something was wrong with him. He had achieved everything he was supposed to achieve, yet he felt like he was dying inside. "I don't understand," he said. "I have everything I ever wanted. Why am I so miserable?" This is the conflict. This is the shadow erupting. Because James didn't have everything he wanted. He had everything he was taught to want. But in pursuing those things, he had abandoned everything he actually needed. In his climb to success, James had stopped playing guitar, which he loved. He had stopped spending time in nature, which restored him. He had stopped writing poetry, which gave him a sense of meaning. He had stopped having deep conversations with friends, which made him feel connected. He had stopped playing with his children without checking his phone. He had stopped making love to his wife with presence and passion. He had stopped dreaming. All of these things, play, creativity, rest, connection, presence, joy, went into the shadow. They didn't generate revenue. They didn't advance his career. They didn't photograph well on social media. So he told himself they were luxuries he would return to someday after he achieved enough success to afford them. But that day never came. Because success, as structured in our culture, has no endpoint, there is always another promotion to chase, another goal to hit, another person to impress. The summit keeps receding, the shadow keeps growing. And here is what Jung discovered about the shadow. It doesn't disappear when we ignore it. It finds other ways to express itself. It leaks out in unexpected ways: anxiety, depression, rage, addiction, illness, self-sabotage. The repressed parts of ourselves don't go quietly. They demand acknowledgement, even if we refuse to consciously give it to them. This is why so many successful people suffer from what psychologists call imposter syndrome. It's not actually a syndrome. It's a symptom of shadow formation. The person we present to the world, confident, capable, accomplished, is increasingly disconnected from our actual felt experience, uncertain, vulnerable, overwhelmed. We feel like imposters because, in a sense, we are. We're presenting a carefully constructed persona while the authentic self languishes in shadow. But the shadow of success manifests in more specific ways. Let me name them, one by one, so you can recognize them in yourself and others. The shadow of relentless striving. This is perhaps the most common manifestation. It's the inability to rest without guilt, the compulsive need to always be productive, optimizing, improving. People with this shadow can't enjoy a vacation because they're not accomplishing anything. They can't sit still because sitting still feels like falling behind. They measure their worth by their output, which means their worth is never secure. Neuroscience reveals what's happening here. The brain's reward circuits have been conditioned to associate rest with threat. Relaxation triggers anxiety because the ego has learned that productivity equals safety. The shadow, the need for genuine rest and integration, has been so thoroughly repressed that it now erupts as its opposite, compulsive activity. The shadow of perfectionism. Success culture demands excellence, but perfectionism is something different and darker. It's the belief that your worth is contingent on flawless performance. Perfectionists live in constant fear of exposure, that someone will discover they're not as good as they appear. They cannot tolerate mistakes, which means they cannot tolerate being human. The shadow here is the vulnerable, imperfect, learning self that needs permission to fail, to struggle, to be messy. But that self threatens the perfect image that success demands, so it's pushed down. And from the shadow, it generates the very anxiety the perfectionist most fears, that they will be revealed as inadequate. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability reveals the cost of this shadow. She found that people who cannot tolerate vulnerability also cannot experience deep joy, love, or connection, because these emotions require opening ourselves to uncertainty and imperfection. The perfectionist achieves success at the cost of the very experiences that make life meaningful. The shadow of competition. Modern success culture is structured around competition. There are winners and losers, leaders and followers, the top 1% and everyone else. This creates a specific shadow, the repression of collaborative, generous, communal impulses. Successful people often report feeling isolated. They have colleagues, but not friends. They have networks, but not communities. They have transactions, but not relationships. Because competition requires keeping others at a distance, evaluating them as rivals or resources rather than as human beings worthy of genuine connection. The shadow here is the deeply human need for belonging, for cooperation, for being part of something larger than individual achievement. But success culture frames these needs as weakness. It tells you to protect your energy and cut off toxic people and focus on your own grind. And so the communal self goes into shadow, and with it goes one of the most essential sources of human well-being. The shadow of emotional suppression. Success is often equated with emotional control. Don't let them see you sweat. Stay professional. Leave your personal life at the door. The successful person learns to perform emotional stability regardless of their internal state, but emotions don't disappear when we suppress them. They go into the body, into the shadow, where they create psychosomatic symptoms, chronic pain, digestive issues, autoimmune disorders. The body keeps the score, as trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk discovered. What we don't express emotionally, we express somatically. And there's something even more insidious here. When we suppress difficult emotions like sadness, fear, and anger, we also diminish our capacity for positive emotions like joy, love, and awe. Emotional suppression is not selective. It's a general dimming of felt experience. The successful person becomes increasingly numb, going through the motions of a life that looks enviable from outside, but feels hollow from within. The shadow of authenticity. Perhaps the deepest shadow of all is the loss of authenticity itself. Success requires image management, personal branding, strategic self-presentation. We learn to show the parts of ourselves that will be rewarded and hide the parts that won't. Over time, we lose touch with who we really are beneath the persona. We forget our genuine preferences, our true values, our authentic desires. We become so skilled at performing success that we no longer know what we would do, who we would be, what we would want if we weren't performing. Jung called this inflation, when we identify so completely with our persona that we lose contact with the self, the deeper, more complete reality of who we are. The successful person becomes their resume, their reputation, their role, and the authentic human being goes into shadow. But here is what makes the shadow of success particularly dangerous. Our culture not only creates these shadows, but actively celebrates them. Workaholism is praised as strong work ethic. Emotional suppression is admired as grace under pressure. The inability to rest is valorized as passion. Competition is framed as necessary for excellence. We have built an entire mythology around success that requires shadow formation as a prerequisite for achievement. The hero's journey, as we tell it now, is not about integration and wholeness. It's about sacrifice and transcendence of human limits, human needs, human vulnerability. It's about becoming more than human, which inevitably means becoming less than human. And nowhere is this clearer than in our cultural idols of success. Steve Jobs, brilliant, visionary, and by many accounts emotionally abusive and disconnected from his own daughter. Elon Musk, reshaping industries while burning out employees and exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. The list goes on. Successful people whose professional achievements are matched by personal chaos, broken relationships, and obvious psychological distress. We see these patterns and we think, that's the price of greatness. That's what it takes. We don't question whether that price should be paid. We don't ask whether success that destroys the person achieving it is actually success at all. But the shadow always demands payment. Always. You cannot indefinitely repress fundamental human needs without consequence. The psyche will rebel, the body will revolt, the soul will insist on acknowledgement. This rebellion takes many forms. Sometimes it's sudden and dramatic. The breakdown, the affair, the public meltdown, the midlife crisis in which someone abandons everything they've built. Sometimes it's slow and insidious. The gradual loss of vitality, the deepening depression, the sense of living in a dream that increasingly feels like a nightmare. And sometimes the shadow erupts as success itself becomes the problem. The achievement becomes the prison. The recognition becomes the burden. The wealth becomes the isolation. Everything they worked for turns to ashes in their mouth, like King Midas discovering he cannot eat gold. Let me share another story. Sarah was a celebrated author, multiple bestsellers, literary awards, university teaching position. Her books explored human consciousness, meaning, and authenticity. She was admired for her insight into the human condition. But Sarah had a secret that made her feel like a fraud. She hadn't written anything authentic in 5 years. Every word was calculated for its commercial appeal, its critical reception, its impact on her brand. She had become a machine for producing what people expected from her, and in the process, she had lost access to her genuine creative voice. The shadow here is profound. The very thing that made her successful, her authentic insight, had to be sacrificed to maintain that success. Her creativity went into shadow, replaced by strategic production. And without her creativity, her life felt meaningless, even as she achieved more external success than ever. This is the ultimate paradox of the shadow side of success. Often, the very qualities that create genuine achievement, creativity, authenticity, passion, deep engagement, are the first things sacrificed in the pursuit of conventional success. We kill the golden goose to get the eggs, and the culture offers no way out. It only offers more of the same, another goal, another achievement, another summit to climb. When people express unhappiness despite success, they are told they're ungrateful. When they struggle with the emptiness of achievement, they're advised to set bigger goals. When they feel disconnected from themselves, they're sold self-help books about personal branding and life optimization. But you cannot optimize your way out of a shadow problem. You cannot achieve your way into wholeness. You cannot successfully escape the consequences of success. The conflict deepens, the pressure builds, the shadow grows larger and more insistent, and eventually, something breaks. Either the person breaks through addiction, illness, suicide, or the persona breaks and the shadow erupts into consciousness in a way that can no longer be ignored. This moment of breaking is what Jung called the confrontation with the shadow. It is painful, it is disorienting, it feels like death, because in a sense it is, the death of the false self, the constructed identity, the persona that success required. But it is also, potentially, the beginning of transformation. Because once the shadow can no longer be denied, once we are forced to acknowledge everything we've repressed in the name of success, we have a choice. We can try to stuff it back down and continue as before, or we can finally turn to face it. James, the executive I mentioned earlier, eventually had his moment of breaking. It came in the form of a panic attack during an important presentation. In front of clients, colleagues, and his CEO, he simply froze, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, had to leave the room. That moment shattered his carefully maintained image, but it also opened a door. For the first time in 20 years, he could no longer pretend everything was fine. The shadow had breached the surface, and there was no pushing it back down. Sarah's moment came differently. She was giving a reading at a prestigious literary festival when a student asked her what advice she would give to young writers, and instead of the polished answer she'd given hundreds of times before, something else came out. Don't become me. Don't let success turn you into a machine. Don't lose your authentic voice in pursuit of recognition. The audience was shocked. Her publicist was horrified, but Sarah felt more alive than she had in years. The shadow had spoken through her, and the truth felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. These moments of breaking are not failures, they are not weaknesses, they are the psyche's desperate attempt to restore balance, to reclaim wholeness, to force an acknowledgement of what has been denied. They are painful, yes, devastating sometimes, but they are also, potentially, the doorway to something more real. Because here is the secret that success culture doesn't want you to know. The shadow is not your enemy. It is not the parts of yourself that are bad, weak, or unworthy. The shadow is everything you've had to exile to fit into a narrow definition of success. And much of what lives in that shadow is not darkness at all. It's light that was deemed unsuitable for the climb. Your playfulness went into shadow because success demands seriousness. Your creativity went into shadow because it wasn't profitable. Your need for rest went into shadow because productivity was paramount. Your authentic emotions went into shadow because they were inconvenient. Your genuine desires went into shadow because they didn't match the script. The shadow of success is largely composed of the very things that make life worth living, and this is the tragedy at the heart of modern achievement culture. We sacrifice meaning in pursuit of success, only to discover that success without meaning is torture. But we are not done with the descent. We must go deeper still. We must examine not just what the shadow costs us individually, but what it costs us collectively. We must explore how the shadow of success shapes our relationships, our society, our very conception of what it means to be human. The conflict intensifies, the darkness deepens, the shadow waits to reveal its final lessons, and we descend further still toward the moment of potential awakening. There comes a moment, after the shadow has erupted and can no longer be denied, when a choice presents itself. It is a choice that determines not just the course of a life, but the quality of consciousness itself. The choice is this: will you turn back, attempting to reconstruct the persona that collapsed, or will you move forward into the unknown territory of integration? Most people, when they first encounter their shadow, try to turn back. It's understandable. The persona of success, even if it's a prison, is at least familiar. The shadow is frightening. It contains everything we've been taught to fear about ourselves: inadequacy, vulnerability, needs we can't control, desires we can't justify, emotions we can't manage. But turning back doesn't work. Not really. Because once you've seen the shadow, once you've felt its presence, once you've acknowledged that something essential has been lost in your pursuit of success, you cannot simply unsee it. You can pretend. You can distract yourself. You can double down on achievement, hoping that the next summit will finally bring fulfillment. But underneath, you know. And that knowing changes everything. So the question becomes, what does it mean to move forward? What does integration look like? How do we reclaim our shadow without abandoning achievement? How do we succeed without betraying ourselves? Jung spent much of his later work exploring this question, and his answer was radical. Integration requires what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. It requires dismantling the persona, facing the shadow, and reconstructing identity on a foundation of wholeness rather than external validation. This is not easy work. It is, in fact, the most difficult work humans can undertake, because it requires questioning everything: your goals, your values, your definitions of success, your reasons for striving. It requires asking, who am I beneath the achievements? What do I actually want versus what I was taught to want? What parts of myself did I leave behind, and how do I welcome them home? Let me share what happened to James after his panic attack. He took medical leave from work, something he never would have allowed himself before. He started therapy, real therapy, not just stress management techniques. And slowly, painfully, he began the process of meeting his shadow. First came the grief. Grief for the years lost to relentless striving. Grief for the moments with his children he had missed while checking emails. Grief for the passionate, creative person he had been at 22 before he put on the armor of success. This grief was overwhelming at times, But his therapist helped him understand something crucial. Grief is the price of awakening. It's what we feel when we finally acknowledge what we've lost. Then came the anger. Anger at the culture that had sold him a fraudulent dream. Anger at the company that had extracted everything from him while giving him a salary and a title in return. Anger at himself for believing that external achievement would make him feel internally whole. This anger was difficult too, but necessary. It was the shadow asserting its right to exist, to be heard, to matter. And slowly, beneath the grief and anger, something else emerged. Curiosity. James began to wonder about the person he might have been if he hadn't been so focused on becoming successful. He picked up his guitar after 15 years and was surprised to find that his fingers remembered. He started writing in a journal, not to optimize his productivity, but just to explore his thoughts. He took walks without his phone, just to notice things. These seemed like small acts, but they represented a revolutionary change. James was beginning to honor the parts of himself that didn't generate value, that weren't productive, that existed simply for their own sake. He was reclaiming his shadow, piece by piece. Sarah's integration journey took a different form. After her public moment of honesty at the literary festival, she made a decision. She would write one book, just one, that was completely authentic, even if no one ever published it. She would write it for herself, from the deepest parts of herself, without any concern for commercial success or critical reception. For months, nothing came. The voice of strategic production was so strong that her authentic voice couldn't break through. But she kept showing up to the page, kept waiting, kept creating space for something genuine to emerge. And eventually it did. A different kind of writing began to flow, raw, more vulnerable, more honest than anything she'd published before. It scared her. It felt too exposed, but it also felt alive in a way her recent work hadn't. When she finally showed this manuscript to her editor, the response surprised her. "This," her editor said, "is what we've been waiting for. This is why people loved your early work. You found your voice again." The book became her most successful yet, but more importantly, the process of writing it had changed Sarah. She had learned that authenticity and success didn't have to be enemies, that in fact, the deepest success, the kind that nourishes rather than depletes, comes precisely from the integration of shadow and light, from honoring all parts of ourselves rather than just the parts that perform well. These stories illustrate something essential about shadow integration. It doesn't mean abandoning achievement or success. It means redefining what those words mean. It means expanding our conception of success to include internal states, not just external outcomes. It means understanding that true achievement integrates rather than fragments the self. So what does this integration actually look like in practice? How do we do this work? First, recognition. You must begin by simply recognizing and naming what's in your shadow. This requires honest self-examination. Ask yourself, what parts of myself did I have to hide to be successful? What do I criticize most harshly in others, and might that be a projection of my own shadow? What needs am I not meeting? What desires am I not acknowledging? Write these things down. Don't judge them. Don't try to fix them yet. Just see them. Recognition is the first step toward integration. Second, compassion. When you begin to see your shadow, the temptation is to judge it harshly, to see your vulnerability as weakness, your needs as burdens, your authentic desires as threats to your success. But judgment only drives the shadow deeper. Instead, practice self-compassion. Understand that you created this shadow as a survival strategy. You repressed parts of yourself because you believed it was necessary to succeed, to be loved, to be safe. That strategy may have outlived its usefulness, but it came from a place of trying to protect yourself. Treat yourself the way you would treat a frightened child who has been hiding, with gentleness, with patience, with the understanding that healing takes time. Third, expression. Shadow elements need outlets. If you've repressed your creativity, create, not for profit or validation, but for the sake of creation itself. If you've repressed your emotions, find safe ways to feel and express them. Therapy, journaling, art, time in nature, conversations with trusted friends. If you've repressed your need for rest, rest. Actually rest. Not as a strategy for better productivity, but as an end in itself. Learn to exist without producing, to be without performing, to rest without guilt. This is harder than it sounds because we've been so thoroughly conditioned to see value only in productivity. But the shadow cannot integrate if it has no space to breathe, no permission to exist on its own terms. Fourth, redefinition. As you begin to integrate your shadow, you'll find that your definitions of success naturally shift. What once seemed like the ultimate achievement may come to feel hollow. What once seemed like failure may reveal itself as wisdom. You might discover that success, truly understood, means alignment between your external life and your internal truth. It means doing work that matters to you, not just work that impresses others. It means having relationships based on genuine connection, not networking opportunities. It means measuring worth by wholeness rather than achievement. This redefinition is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it frees you from the endless treadmill of external validation. Terrifying because it requires you to stand on your own ground, to define value for yourself, to risk disappointing others' expectations. Fifth, integration through action. Eventually, shadow work must move from internal process to external expression. This means making different choices, setting boundaries that honor your needs, even if they inconvenience others. Pursuing opportunities that align with your values, even if they're less prestigious. Saying no to demands on your time and energy that deplete rather than nourish you. It might mean changing careers or staying in your career, but approaching it differently. It might mean ending relationships that require you to perform rather than be yourself. It might mean starting creative projects that will never be profitable, but restore your soul. These actions will feel risky. They are risky, because they threaten the persona you've constructed, the identity you've built around success. But they are necessary. Integration isn't just an internal experience, it requires that we live differently. Sixth, community and witness. Shadow integration cannot happen in complete isolation. We need others who can see us fully, who can witness our wholeness without needing us to perform success. We need communities that value being over doing, presence over productivity, authenticity over achievement. This is challenging in a culture that prizes individual success above collective well-being, but it's essential. Find your people, therapists, friends, groups, communities, who understand what you're attempting and can support you through the inevitable difficulties of this transformation. Now here's something crucial to understand. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean achieving some final state of psychological perfection. Shadow work is ongoing. New layers reveal themselves. Old patterns resurface. That's not failure. That's the nature of depth psychology. We spiral through these themes at deeper levels throughout our lives. But something fundamental shifts when you commit to integration. You stop running from yourself. You stop believing that success will finally complete you if you just achieve enough. You stop sacrificing your humanity on the altar of achievement. And paradoxically, this often leads to more genuine success. Not the hollow kind that looks good from outside, but feels empty from within. But the deeper kind, work that matters, relationships that nourish, a life that feels authentic, achievements that don't require the sacrifice of your soul. Research supports this. Studies on authentic leadership show that leaders who can integrate all parts of themselves, including their vulnerabilities, are more effective and more trusted. Research on creativity demonstrates that the most original work comes from people who can access their full emotional and psychological range, not from those who have repressed half of their humanity. The ancient concept of the wounded healer captures this paradox beautifully. The healer who has never been wounded cannot truly heal others because they cannot understand suffering. But the healer who has been wounded and has integrated that wound who carries it consciously rather than denying it, can transform their pain into medicine for others. This is what integrating the shadow of success offers, the possibility of transforming our struggle with achievement into wisdom that serves not just ourselves but others, of becoming people whose success enriches rather than depletes, who inspire through wholeness rather than through the illusion of perfection. But let me be clear, this path is not for everyone, not immediately. Some people need their current definition of success. They're not ready to question it, and that's okay. Shadow work requires a certain readiness, a moment when the pain of staying the same exceeds the fear of change. If you're reading this, or rather, if you've made it this far in this journey, you're likely at or approaching that moment. Something in you knows that conventional success isn't enough. Something in you is calling for integration, for wholeness, for a more authentic way of being. Listen to that voice. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is your shadow speaking, and it has wisdom to offer. It knows what you've forgotten, that you are more than your achievements, that your worth is not conditional on productivity, that the parts of you that don't perform are not less valuable than the parts that do. The shadow knows that you are already whole beneath all the striving, that you don't need to become something more. You need to remember something essential that you already are. This is the awakening, the realization that the summit was never the destination, that success, as commonly defined, is at best a partial truth and at worst a dangerous illusion, that the real work, the truly transformative work, is not climbing higher but descending deeper, not achieving more but integrating what already is. James eventually returned to work, but he negotiated a different role, one with less prestige but more alignment with his values. He works 40 hours a week now, not 80. He plays music. He's present with his children. He's learning to simply be without producing. His colleagues think he's wasted potential or lost his drive. But James doesn't care about their judgment anymore, not in the way he used to. He knows something they don't yet know, that the price they're paying for success is too high and that there's another way. Sarah kept writing, but differently now. She writes what's true, not what's strategic. Her work has depth that comes from integration, from a willingness to bring her whole self to the page. And readers can tell the difference. They can feel the authenticity. These are small stories, individual stories, but they point toward something larger, the possibility of a different relationship with success, one that doesn't require shadow formation, one that honors the full spectrum of human experience, one that defines achievement as the integration of light and shadow, inner and outer, being and doing. Imagine a culture where success meant wholeness, where we celebrated not just what people achieved, but who they became in the process, where failure was understood as information rather than identity, where rest was seen as essential rather than lazy, where vulnerability was valued as strength, where creativity was honored for its own sake, where community mattered as much as individual achievement. This might sound utopian, impossibly idealistic, but it's not. It's simply what becomes possible when individuals begin to do their shadow work, when they refuse to participate in the cultural lie that achievement requires self-abandonment. Every person who integrates their shadow, who reclaims the parts of themselves they sacrificed for success, makes it slightly easier for the next person to do the same. Every act of authentic being in a culture of performative doing is an act of revolution. And this brings us to the threshold of our conclusion. We have descended into the shadow of success. We have traced its origins, examined its costs, explored its integration. Now we must return, changed by the journey, carrying the wisdom of the depths back to the surface. But we return differently than we left. We return with eyes that can see both light and shadow, with hearts that can hold both achievement and authenticity, with a new understanding of what success really means when it serves wholeness rather than demanding its sacrifice. The awakening is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a different kind of journey, one that spirals ever deeper into truth rather than ever higher into achievement, one that values being as much as doing, one that knows that the shadow is not something to be conquered, but something to be befriended, integrated, honored. This is the wisdom the shadow has been trying to teach us all along, that we are already whole. That success that requires us to fragment ourselves is not success at all, that the summit is empty, but the depths are full. That true achievement integrates rather than divides. Let us complete the descent. Let us return to the light, carrying the wisdom of the shadow. Let us discover what it means to succeed without betraying ourselves. The journey concludes, but the transformation has only begun. We have traveled far together through the landscape of consciousness, descending into territories rarely mapped in our success-obsessed culture. We have seen how achievement casts a shadow, how success demands sacrifice, how the climb upward often requires abandoning essential parts of ourselves in the valleys below. But we have also discovered something our culture desperately needs to understand, that the shadow is not our enemy, that the parts of ourselves we exile in pursuit of success are not weaknesses to be overcome, but dimensions of our humanity waiting to be reclaimed. That true success, success that nourishes rather than depletes, that integrates rather than fragments, that enriches the soul rather than emptying it, requires befriending the shadow, not denying it. Think back to the beginning of this journey. I asked you, who did you have to stop being to become successful? Now, at the end, I ask something different. Who might you become if you reclaimed those lost parts of yourself? This is not a rhetorical question. It is an invitation to examine your own relationship with success, to notice what shadows you've created, to feel where you've fragmented yourself, to recognize what you've repressed, and then, if you're ready, to begin the sacred work of integration. This work will not be easy. Our culture will not support you in it. Society still worships at the altar of conventional success. The algorithm still rewards performative achievement. The voices around you will still tell you that rest is laziness, that vulnerability is weakness, that anything that doesn't generate value is worthless. But you know better now. You've descended into the shadow and discovered its secret, that what we call success is often just a well-lit prison, and that freedom lies in the depths we've been taught to fear. Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but becoming who you truly are requires unbecoming who you thought you had to be. It requires dismantling the persona of success and rediscovering the person beneath it. This is the most radical act available to us in this moment of human history, to define success for ourselves, to refuse the cultural script that says we must sacrifice our humanity to achieve something, to insist that our worth is not conditional on our productivity, to honor the full spectrum of our experience, not just the parts that photograph well. What would your life look like if you integrated your shadow? If you let yourself rest without guilt? If you pursued what genuinely called to you rather than what impressed others? If you measured success by wholeness rather than achievement? If you brought your whole self to your work rather than just your performing self? These questions have no universal answers. Your shadow is unique to you. Your integration will follow its own path. Your definition of redeemed success will be your own. But the pattern is universal. Recognition, compassion, expression, redefinition, integration, and ultimately, transformation. From fragmentation to wholeness, from performing to being, from the summit's emptiness to the depth's fullness. Remember James? Remember Sarah? They are not exceptional. They are not unique in their struggle. They are simply people who reached the breaking point where the shadow could no longer be denied, and who made the courageous choice to face it rather than flee from it. You can make that choice too, not just in one moment, but in each moment, in every decision about how you spend your time, what you value, who you become, in every choice between authentic being and strategic performing. in every act of honoring your needs even when the culture tells you they don't matter. This is how cultures change, one integrated individual at a time. One person refusing to participate in the collective delusion that achievement requires self-betrayal. One heart reclaiming its full emotional range. One human being choosing wholeness over perfection. And here is the beautiful paradox we discovered in the depths. When you stop sacrificing yourself for success, you often become more genuinely successful, not by conventional metrics alone, but by the measures that actually matter: meaning, purpose, connection, authenticity, presence, love. Because the energy you were spending maintaining the persona becomes available for actually creating. The attention you were using to monitor how you appear becomes available for deep work. The aliveness you were repressing becomes fuel for genuine inspiration. The shadow integrated becomes power. Not power over others, but power to be yourself, to create from wholeness, to act from authenticity, to succeed without self-betrayal. This is the future of human consciousness, not transcending the shadow, but integrating it. Not rising above our humanity, but embracing its fullness. Not succeeding at the cost of the soul, but discovering what success means when it serves the soul's evolution. We stand at a threshold as a species. The old model of success is killing us, literally, in cases of suicide and burnout, and spiritually, in the widespread experience of meaninglessness despite achievement. But a new model is emerging, built on the wisdom of depth psychology, supported by research on well-being, and embodied by individuals who are brave enough to question everything they've been taught about achievement. You can be part of this emergence. You can be someone who refuses to accept that success requires shadow formation. You can be a voice for integration in a culture of fragmentation. You can be an example of what authentic achievement looks like. But it starts with one question, asked with radical honesty: what is living in my shadow? And it continues with one commitment, made with courageous vulnerability: I will reclaim what I've lost. The summit is behind you now, revealed as empty. But the depths are before you, full of everything you need. The shadow waits not as an enemy, but as a guide, ready to show you the way to wholeness. Success is not the enemy, achievement is not wrong, ambition is not evil, but success without integration is hollow. Achievement without authenticity is torture. Ambition without self-knowledge is dangerous. Integrate your shadow, and all of these things, success, achievement, ambition, become different. They become expressions of wholeness rather than escapes from it. They become ways of being in the world rather than ways of hiding from yourself. They become aligned with who you are rather than opposed to it. This is the message from the depths. This is the wisdom of the shadow. This is the truth that success culture doesn't want you to know. You are already enough. You don't need to become something more. You need to reclaim what you already are. The journey inward is the journey forward. The descent into shadow is the path to light. The questioning of success is the door to genuine achievement. As you return to your life after this journey, carry this understanding with you, that every time you honor a need the culture tells you to ignore, you reclaim a piece of your shadow. Every time you choose authenticity over performance, you integrate a fragment of your wholeness. Every time you measure your worth by something other than productivity, you free yourself from the prison of conventional success. The work continues. The shadow always has more to teach, but you now have a map, a framework, an understanding of what's possible when we stop running from ourselves and start turning toward our wholeness. So I leave you with this final question, the one that will echo long after these words fade. What will you do with your one precious life now that you know success doesn't require sacrifice of your soul? How will you define achievement for yourself? What will wholeness look like in your particular existence? The summit is empty. The depths are full. The shadow is waiting. And you, the whole you, the integrated you, the authentic you, are the only one who can decide what success really means. May you have the courage to descend. May you have the wisdom to integrate. May you have the strength to redefine success on your own terms. And may you discover, in the depths of your own shadow, the light you've been seeking on every summit. The journey ends here, but the transformation, yours, ours, humanity's, has only just begun. Remember, the shadow is not your enemy. It is your forgotten wholeness, waiting to be embraced, and in that embrace lies the redemption of success itself. Thank you for descending with me into these depths. Thank you for your willingness to question, to feel, to think deeply about things our culture prefers to keep shallow. The echoes of the ancients speak clearly. Know thyself. And now you know that knowing yourself includes knowing your shadow, that success without self-knowledge is failure in disguise, that achievement without integration is imprisonment in plain sight. Go now. Return to your life. But return changed. Return with new eyes that can see both light and shadow. Return with a new definition of success that honors your wholeness. Return with the courage to be authentically yourself, even when, especially when, that self doesn't fit the script of conventional achievement. The shadow side of success is not a curse, it is a teacher, and the lesson is simple, profound, and necessary. Be whole, be authentic, be yourself. Everything else, including success, genuinely understood, will follow. This is the end of the speech, but the beginning of your transformation. May you integrate well. May you succeed truly. May you become at last who you actually are. The echoes of the ancients continue in you.